Welcome to Train Time, a podcast from the Train Campaign. You'll hear from leaders around the country about different passenger rail projects because we're convinced that passenger rail is the essential framework for efficient, sustainable transportation in the 21st century. Train Time is hosted by Karen Christensen, who founded the Train Campaign.
Pardon me, boys, is that the Chattanooga choo-choo?
Support for Train Time is provided by the Transportation for Massachusetts Coalition, which includes more than 100 organizations advocating for clean, equitable, smart transportation solutions. From sidewalks and bike lanes to intercity rail, T4MA is leading the conversation on how we can build a truly modern transportation system. Learn more at t4ma.org.
Dinner in the diner, nothing could be finer than to have your ham and eggs in Carolina.
Hello, I'm Karen Christensen. On this episode of Train Time, we're talking to a Massachusetts state representative, my representative, in fact, Smitty Pignatelli of Lenox. Rep Pignatelli has been a great and vocal advocate for regional equity in transportation, infrastructure, and many other areas. He wants to see rural areas like ours thrive and get a fair shake. With all the recent news about the infrastructure bill, we have a lot to talk about today, including West-East Rail. Hey, Smitty, I'm so used to calling you Smitty. I hope you don't mind.
Well, and that's the way it should be. But good morning. Pleasure to be here with you.
Terrific. Train Time has, ranged far and wide, but this feels really like bringing it back home, talking about, the part of Massachusetts that you and I both know and love. You for much longer because I think you were born here.
Yep, born and raised. My father was born and raised. So, in fact, my grandfather immigrated from Italy, came to Ellis Island, and got to the Berkshires by rail. So we've had a long history of 140 years in the Berkshires.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that long. So that's a perfect beginning for this, because we're talking about bringing back a connectivity to this region that we lost some years ago, as many parts of the country and many places in other countries have lost. And obviously there's a lot going on now. Now I would love to have you tell us how let's focus. I spent a lot of time working on the Berkshire line, but there's some stuff going on right now in terms of West-East Rail, as you've taught me to call it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about West-East Rail. When did you start thinking about this? I know you've been on a couple of committees. Tell us that story and bring us up to date.
Well, I have to give you all the credit, seriously. I think you've been such a champion for rail in general, but in particular, the north-south rail from the Berkshires to Danbury to New York City. So I think that's what's really raised the awareness for a lot of us. And as you know, I've long said that, we can't legitimately look at north-south unless we look at west-east. And I did coin the phrase west-east to much like the Mass Turnpike, which began in West Stockbridge, Massachusetts in the Berkshires and made it to Boston. My biggest fear is if we start things in Boston, it will never get to the Berkshires. So that west-east conversation has to be legitimate, and we need to weigh the options. So I was appointed to the governor's task force to look at transit throughout the Commonwealth. And the white paper just came out last week from Mass DOT Rail. And I've long envisioned an economic corridor from Albany, New York, Berkshire, Springfield, Worcester, Boston, west-east, east-west, would then turn into a very legitimate north-south hub from Pittsfield, much like Springfield has become a hub, much like Worcester has become a hub. I think there's no reason why the Berkshires can't be a hub for legitimate rail, not only helping us environmentally by getting cars off the road, but giving people that opportunity to live here and work there. That could go either way as well. But talking about a commuter rail, more so than a passenger rail, I think is paramount for what I believe is a once-in-a-century investment, a once-in-a-multi-generational opportunity to do this thing the right way. The Berkshires cannot be viewed as a backbencher.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up Albany, because what there are always these issues of the ridership, and the more you expand a network and the more places you can get to on a rail system, the more return there is on the money that's invested in it. And we're in a great position. We're essentially equidistant from New York and Boston. And then there's Albany, a state capital, a city of almost 100,000 people, not far away either.
Well, if you look at our travel and tourism, which full well about as well, if you drew a 3 to 4 hour concentric circle around the Berkshires, I mean, there's probably 45 million people that have the potential to come visit the Berkshires. So now we look at this COVID situation we've gone through for the last 2 years. Clearly, people are here in the Berkshires. Clearly, people
Yes.
are learning to work remotely in the Berkshires. We have our beautiful natural social distancing. We have all the amenities that I would say rival anywhere in the Commonwealth or New England. But what are we going to do to keep them here? The ability to live here, work there, I think is an opportunity that investments in rail and transportation are paramount. And that's why I can't say enough. If we're going to do this, we have to do it right, or we shouldn't do it at all. And right now, the proposal, in my opinion, is very flawed. It's insufficient. And that economic opportunity for folks to live in the Berkshires and work in Albany or Worcester or Boston or vice versa, I think cannot be a missed opportunity going forward.
Yeah. Now, the proposal that came out from the Department of Transportation was to create a Western Massachusetts Intercity Rail Authority that would be somehow separate from Mass DOT. But your concern is that it would focus, that it would end up being too, Eastern Mass centric. Is that your sole concern? I think you have other concerns as well.
Well, I have a lot of concerns. I don't think we have enough time today.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Go for it.
But I really believe, and we've been talking for years about this east-west, west-east economic divide between Western Mass and Eastern Mass. This proposal, in my opinion, further compounds that discussion. To have a separate oversight agency or governmental agency that doesn't have an identified funding stream, I think is short-sighted, going to be very problematic. As you know, 1 penny on the sales tax, every person that buys something in the Berkshires right now and pays a sales tax, 1 penny of that goes directly to the MBTA in Boston.
I do know that.
That amounts to $30 to $35 million annually going directly to the MBTA. Now, I've been a state legislator for going on 20 years. I can honestly tell you, I've never once set foot on an MBTA bus or a subway in the city of Boston, but yet I'm paying for it.
Yes.
So,
yes,
and then a lot of the elected officials in Boston and people running for statewide office are saying fares at the MBTA should be free. Well, yeah, it's free while we're subsidizing it in Berkshire County and Western Massachusetts. That's not fair. It's free in Boston, but yet we struggle with the BRTA in the Berkshires for, after hours services, weekend services, trying to have schedules conducive to people's work schedules. So if you work at a local restaurant or even own a restaurant and you close up at 10, 11 o'clock at night, how do you get home? There's no public transit ability to do that. So while we're trying to find ways to enhance and expand services, folks in Boston are saying, just give it to me free, but yet the Berkshires will keep paying for it. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you bring up the issue of equity in many areas, not just in transportation. And this is certainly one where we do deserve a fair shake. And, you're concerned, I think all of us, this issue of fares I find very interesting because there's been a lot of talk in Massachusetts about free fares. And I find myself wondering if that's really what concerns the public. It seems like to me, what I hear about is people want there to be transportation. They want it to be reliable. They want it to have schedules that meet their needs. It's not the fares so much that I'm hearing about.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think when it comes to transit, we want reliability, we want affordability, I think those are just two of the key components of this. Now, for years, we've been saying no turnpike tolls on the Mass Turnpike, but yet that's a user road. If you don't ever drive on the Mass Turnpike, you don't pay for it. But when you do use it, and I would argue, even in the winter, I'm looking out my window right now with a foot of snow in my front yard, I'm thinking that is one of the best roads in Massachusetts because it's well maintained. Well, that costs money. So what is wrong with asking people who use the road to pay a little bit to do it? Now, it's got to be affordable. It's got to be reliable. And I think some of the exorbitant fares of the MBTA, I think, need to be reduced. But I'm not a big fan of making it free. If you use it, you should be expected to pay for it. Someone's got to pay for the bus. Someone's got to pay for the bus driver. Someone's got to pay for the ticket people. So I think there's an obligation, and I have no objections to paying something reasonable to use a public transit system. But it's got to be affordable if I'm going to use it on a regular basis. And right now, I think this transit from the Berkshires to Boston, it's not reliable and it's not affordable to do it on a commuter basis. And I think we've been advocating, under your leadership for a long time, a legitimate commuter rail. What they gave us in this report, in my opinion, is a passenger rail with no funding mechanism to do it. And I think we have a lot more work to do to make sure this is right.
Yes, and Mass DOT has specifically said that they would want Amtrak. They would recommend that Amtrak operate east-west rail service.
Well, that's what they're saying now, and in my personal opinion, I don't think Amtrak is reliable, and it's certainly not affordable. You and I from the Berkshires can drive to Wassaic, hop on the Metro North, make a round trip to New York City in $50, $60. You and I could drive to Hudson, New York right now, hop on the Amtrak from Hudson, New York. It's a much prettier ride to New York City along the Hudson River for $150 or $200. But if I have to do that on a regular commuter basis, that is cost prohibitive. And I think the history of Amtrak is not reliable and it's not affordable. My legislative aide in Boston, she came home for the holidays. She took the Amtrak train from Boston. It took about 4.5 hours, cost her one way, I think $40. But yet, if you live in Boston, you could buy a monthly pass on the MBTA for like $90 and ride it 25 times a day for the same $90. So there's a real economic divide, and I think we need to address that in order to make this proper investment.
Yeah, Amtrak has been long focused on, in fact, was in a sense set up to preserve the long distance, the cross-country routes, and the regional kind of system, the commuter or the remote worker. I'm not sure if we're going to have to come up with a new name if it's not daily commuting, but it's regularly going into the city.
Yeah.
That is a commuting. And that indeed, the price really it makes a difference. And reliability is essential. I took Amtrak to Washington over Thanksgiving, actually, and it was it's a nice way to get there, no question. But one of the things that always surprises me is how much people simply expect Amtrak trains to be late.
Yeah. They've grown accustomed to it, unfortunately.
They've grown accustomed to it. And that is not true in other countries. In other countries, you actually expect a train schedule to be something you can count on. It doesn't always happen, but people get really mad when it doesn't happen. And here it's like, oh, well, it's, a half an hour late. And everyone, we've just got, so we are, we're tolerating it. But that really does keep a lot of people from using trains.
I think it does. And if you and I were going to Boston to go to a ball game, we would go down early anyways and make sure if it's a half hour late, we're still an hour and a half early. But if you're doing this for business on a regular basis, I can't afford to be 45 minutes late to a meeting, and I think
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And that's why it's got to be reliable. They have to have tighter scheduling, and it's got to be affordable. And even if you're making that trip one day a week, or maybe 2 days a week. Maybe it's not 5 days a week. It still has to be reliable and affordable. And right now it's not. And I don't have a good feeling in my stomach right now that Mass DOT Rail was truly committed to Berkshire County. As you remember, they talked about buses from the Berkshires to Springfield. I was labeled the bus killer, which is fine. But I'm also predicting that, they're going to have great service from Worcester to Boston, okay service from Springfield to Worcester, and then you get on the MBTA in Worcester to get to Boston anyways, and we're going to have poor to non-existent from Springfield to the Berkshires. If we're going to have a transit system for the entirety of the Commonwealth, we need to shake it up. We need to rethink things. And I said on a call just before I got on with you, Karen, we need to break down the MBTA. It should no longer be called the Metropolitan Boston Transit Authority. We should call it the Mass Transit Authority or the Commonwealth Transit Authority. And it's a Commonwealth authority for the entirety of the Commonwealth, not just one part for Boston, another part for the Berkshires and Western Mass, and another part for Cape Cod. I think we have an opportunity to do this thing right. I don't know of any other state that has multiple transit authorities running the rail systems, much like they're proposing for Massachusetts.
And I have heard people talk about the the city systems, including New York, should extend much farther. I mean, we think about going to Wassaic. That's the MTA in New York, and that's a route that's almost 2 hours out of New York. Excuse me.
Yeah. Well, you think about the MBTA currently. It now goes to Worcester. I mean, Worcester is the second largest city in the Commonwealth. So clearly that's not metropolitan Boston. It's expanded that route. You can take an MBTA commuter rail to Providence, Rhode Island. So that interstate rail system is already existing in Massachusetts. Let's just expand the footprint of the MBTA. I think we should call it a different name, but have it come out to Springfield and Berkshire County. And then maybe if we are forced into doing an Amtrak from the Berkshires to Albany, that's fine too. But to have a Commonwealth Transit Authority, I think is got to be priority number one to do this thing legitimately. And for the next 100 years, we're making a major investment that you and I hope we both live a long time. We may not live long enough to see what we're envisioning right now. But for the next generations to come, I think people like you and I are going to be the ones who have laid the foundation for this. And we can't wait 5 more years or 10 more years or 20 more years. It's already 20 years too late. Let's not wait any longer.
It is, and we want a 21st century rail system, and that's my concern often about the Amtrak mentality, is that it seems, it began 50 years ago. It seems very 20th century.
Well, we want a 21st century transit system, but we're already at the end of year 2021, going into 2022.
We better get moving.
Well, we got to get moving. I've always said the best time to plant a tree is 40 years ago. Well, we better start planting the trees right now for a commuter rail system throughout the Commonwealth and maybe multi-states. And I think this would change the economy dramatically for Massachusetts, but especially Western Massachusetts, where we've seen a loss of population, a loss of economic base. We have an opportunity to reboot this whole conversation, and the live here, work there attitude could be from anywhere in Massachusetts very easily, reliably, and affordably. All boats will rise, and that's why we're called a Commonwealth. Let's enhance that opportunity to do what we're named after. All boats will rise with one agenda.
The other thing I want to ask is to talk about the connection to New York, because as we both know, a lot of people in the Berkshires are oriented toward New York, probably more than to Boston.
I agree.
And when you talk to people about it, how do you get across the idea that it's not just one line or the other? It's about creating connections to both cities and the kind of amplifying the value of each.
Yeah, I think folks from New York, I think, understand it better than Boston people. to be honest with you, on the importance of rail, because they depend on the rail to get everywhere in New York City. But I think people, and I've learned during COVID, but I think if you look at the real estate market in the Berkshires during COVID, we've seen a lot of folks from down east looking at the Berkshires very differently. If we could give them that economic opportunity to live here, work there, I think we could see a great influx of Eastern folks. But that concentric circle that I talked about earlier, I mean, we're talking 40, 45 million people that could, and we're right in the middle of two state capitals. Think about that. Albany, New York, and Boston, the largest city in New England, we're right in the middle of this. This is an opportunity for us all to really have a vision for the next 100 years, the next generation. And if we don't do that, I think shame on all of us. It would help the environment by getting cars off the road. It would help other businesses look at the Berkshires very differently about coming here. And can't find an Uber or a Lyft anywhere in the Berkshire County right now, but you could have those opportunities going forward as long as we get people here. People are here. What are we going to do to keep them here?
We want to keep them here, and for young people, especially, I'm noticing young people with new young families. They love the idea of being in a place like this. What a fabulous place to live! But they also want to pursue careers, and especially if they're both working, to give them the opportunity to live in a place where they can get to New York or to Boston or to Albany.
That's exactly right. And we've made some major investments in broadband. So people who are working from home can access the outside world very quickly. But then the next major investment is transit. And I think this rail transit is real and is right on the heels of broadband. It's going to change the demographics of Western Massachusetts, especially the Berkshires. And that's why I'm harping on we need to do it right for the next 100 years. If not, we're going to be thinking back when you and I are old people sitting in our rocking chairs saying, boy, what a missed opportunity in 2021. And that's what I don't want to have any regrets going forward.
Well, thank you, Smitty, for your advocacy on this very, very important piece of making a prosperous future here and across the state. This kind of transformation will benefit people everywhere in the Commonwealth.
Well, I thank you very much, and you've been my mentor on this rail for a long time, and really, we wouldn't be where we are today without your doggedness attitude on getting this thing going. And I can't thank you enough for all that you've done.
Wow.
So I enjoy working with you.
Me too. All right, great. It's lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Support for Train Time is provided by the Transportation for Massachusetts Coalition, which includes more than 100 organizations advocating for clean, equitable, smart transportation solutions. From sidewalks and bike lanes to intercity rail, T4MA is leading the conversation on how we can build a truly modern transportation system. Learn more at t4ma.org.
Thanks for joining us today. The Train Time podcast is brought to you by the Train Campaign, sharing a vision for passenger rail as the essential framework for efficient, sustainable transportation in the 21st century. Learn more at traincampaign.org.